It was still dark outside when Sarah stepped out of her small house. The air was cold and quiet, and the only sounds were the soft crunch of her worn-out shoes on the gravel path. She pulled her faded jacket tighter around her shoulders and began. Walking 20 miles lay ahead of her before she would reach her workplace. It was a distance most people would never even think of walking. But for Sarah, it was just another day. The road was long and lonely, with streetlights only in certain places. In the early hours, she often passed empty fields and quiet houses. Their windows glowed warmly. And sometimes she wondered what it must feel like to wake up, pour a hot cup of coffee, and simply drive to work. But she didn't let herself think about it for too long. There was no car waiting for her in the driveway, no bus stop nearby, and no one she could ask for a ride. Walking was her only choice, and she had learned to accept it. Sarah always left home before the first hint of sunrise. She knew every turn, every crack in the pavement, and even the dogs that barked from behind fences as she passed. Her legs often ached, and her shoes had thin soles from the miles they had carried her. Still, she kept moving, because she couldn't afford to be late. Her boss was strict, and the thought of losing her job was something she couldn't risk. Sometimes the walk felt endless, especially when the wind was strong or the rain poured down on bad weather days. Her clothes would be soaked through before she was even halfway there. But Sarah never turned back. She would keep her head down, focusing on one step at a time, telling herself that every step brought her closer to the warm light of the diner where she worked. On good days, she found small moments of beauty along the way. She would see the first rays of sunlight, turning the sky pink and gold, or hear birds singing as the world slowly woke up. Those moments made her smile, reminding her that even in a hard life, there were still things worth noticing. But most of the time, the walk was a test of her strength. Her stomach would sometimes growl because she had skipped breakfast to save money. Her hands would go numb from the cold, and she would count the miles in her head to keep herself going. She didn't have fancy running shoes or warm gloves, but she had something stronger: determination. The journey took her hours, and by the time she reached the city, the streets were alive with people hurrying to work. Most of them passed her without a second glance. They didn't know she had already been walking for hours while they were still sleeping. They didn't know how much effort it took just to show up and do her job. Sarah never complained to anyone. She didn't tell her coworkers how far she walked or how early she woke up. She didn't want pity. She believed that life was about doing what you had to do, even if it was hard. And so, day after day, she repeated the same routine step after step, mile after mile, until she finally pushed open the diner door, greeted by the smell of fresh coffee and the warmth of the kitchen. Her walk was not just a way to get to work. It was a symbol of her willpower, of her refusal to give up no matter how heavy the load felt. Each mile told a story of sacrifice, and even though her feet hurt and her body was tired, she carried herself with quiet pride, because deep down, she knew something that no one could take away. She was stronger than the miles in front of her. Asterisk. Most people who saw Sarah walking along the road every day would never have guessed why she did it. To them, she might have just been another face in the crowd, another person going about her business. But the truth was far more difficult and heartbreaking than anyone could imagine. Sarah lived with her younger sister, Emily, in a tiny rented house on the edge of town. Their parents had passed away years ago, leaving them to figure out life on their own. Emily was still in high school, full of dreams about her future. Sarah was determined to make sure her sister would never have to give up those dreams. That meant paying for her school supplies, her clothes, and even the little things like her bus fare to school. After paying the rent and the bills, there was almost nothing left. The money she earned from her job at the diner barely covered their basic needs. She also worked a few evenings at a small grocery store just to keep up with expenses. A car for her wasn't just a luxury, it was something far out of reach. The cost of buying one, insuring it, and filling it with fuel was impossible with her current income, but Sarah didn't want Emily to feel the same kind of struggles she did. She wanted her sister to focus on her studies, not worry about how to get by. That's why she kept her own hardships quiet. She never told Emily how early she woke up or how long she walked to work. She didn't want her to feel guilty or to think she was a burden. Every morning before Emily even opened her eyes, Sarah was already out the door, walking those long miles. She would slip a note on the kitchen table, sometimes a small "have a good day," or "don't forget your homework," so her sister knew she was thinking of her, even though the walk was exhausting. The thought of Emily's future kept her going. Sarah's determination came from a deep place. She remembered the promises she had made to herself the day she became her sister's guardian. She swore that Emily would finish school, that she would have every chance at life that Sarah never had. If that meant walking 20 miles every day, then so be it. There were days when her legs felt heavy as stone, when the cold wind cut through her jacket, when rain soaked her clothes and made her shiver. But she pushed forward because the paycheck at the end of the week was not just for her, was their lifeline. Every dollar mattered, every shift mattered. And so every step mattered, sometimes during her walk. She would pass by car dealerships or people filling their cars with gas. She would imagine for just a moment what it would be like to sit behind the wheel and drive to work in minutes instead of hours. But she quickly pushed the thought away. She didn't have time to dwell on what she couldn't have. She needed to focus on what she could do. Sarah's reason for walking wasn't about stubbornness or pride. It was about love, plain and simple. Love for her sister, love for the hope of a better future. Love for the idea that sacrifices today could mean a brighter tomorrow. Every blister on her feet, every ache in her back, every tired step was a quiet reminder of that love. What Sarah didn't know was that her reason for walking, the one she kept so private, would soon become the reason strangers across the city and, eventually, across the country would rally behind her. But for now, in those quiet early mornings, it was just her, the road, and the promise she was determined to keep. Asterisk. It was another chilly morning when Officer Daniel Hayes first noticed her. He was sitting in his patrol car at the edge of the highway, sipping a lukewarm coffee, watching the world slowly wake up. Most cars zoomed past him, their headlights cutting through the fog. But then he saw her, a lone figure walking steadily along the shoulder of the road. Her head was slightly bowed, her steps even but determined. At first, he didn't think much of it. People walked in the mornings all the time. But the next day, he saw her again. Same road, same time, same slow but steady pace. Her jacket looked too thin for the cold, and her shoes didn't seem built for long distances. She carried no bag. No sign that she was heading out for a quick errand, just a quiet focus in her stride. Days turned into weeks, and the image of her began to stick in his mind. He realized that she wasn't just walking for exercise or fresh air. She was traveling really. Traveling on foot. Officer Hayes started to notice details he had missed before. The way her shoes were scuffed at the toes, the faint limp in her left leg when she got tired. The way her breath turned into little white clouds in the cold morning air. Something about her persistence struck him. He had seen plenty of people give up when life got hard, but here was this woman, pushing herself along a 20-mile stretch of road every single day without fail. There was no frustration in her movements, no sign of hesitation. She just kept going, like the road was part of her daily existence. One morning, curiosity got the better of him. He decided to check his patrol logs. Sure enough, the times and locations matched. She passed the same stretch of road almost every day around dawn. That meant she had already been walking for hours before he even saw her. That realization unsettled him. What kind of situation would force someone to do that? He thought about pulling over to ask, but something stopped him. Maybe she wouldn't want to talk to a stranger in uniform. Maybe she was proud. Or maybe she simply wanted to be left alone. Still, the thought of her long journey nagged at him, especially when the weather turned colder on snowy mornings. He watched her carefully placing her feet to avoid slipping on rainy days. Her jacket clung to her shoulders, and her hair dripped with water, yet she never missed a day, not even when the wind was fierce enough to push against her stride. By now, she had become more than just another pedestrian to him. She was a mystery one that tugged at the edges of his mind. Officer Hayes was used to solving problems, catching criminals, and helping people in emergencies. But this was different. This was a quiet kind of mystery, and he knew that if he didn't find out her story, it would keep bothering him. Little did Sarah know that her daily walk, something she had tried so hard to keep private, had already caught the attention of someone who wouldn't just let it go. Officer Hayes didn't know her name yet, or where she came from. B was about to take the first step toward finding out, and what he would learn would change both their lives forever. Asterisk. The morning was still dark when Officer Hayes made up his mind. He had been seeing her for weeks now, always at the same time, always in the same place. Today, instead of just watching from his patrol car, he decided he was going to follow her, not to frighten her or intrude, but to finally understand the truth behind those long miles. He waited until she passed his usual spot on the roadside. Her steps were as steady as ever, her face calm but unreadable in the pale glow of the streetlights. She didn't notice him as he pulled out slowly. Keeping a safe distance, he turned off his headlights for a while, letting the faint morning light guide his way so she wouldn't suspect she was being followed. The first few miles were quiet. She moved along the shoulder of the road like someone who had done it hundreds of times. Her pace never faltered. Her shoes made a soft, steady rhythm against the pavements. Step, step. Each movement told him this was a routine, not a one-time hardship. He followed her through stretches of road that most drivers barely noticed, roads lined with leafless trees swaying in the wind. Narrow sidewalks cracked from years of wear. At one point, she crossed an intersection where cars whizzed past, weaving carefully between them without hesitation. It was dangerous, and his hand tightened on the steering wheel as he watched the miles pass slowly. The air was cold enough to sting his cheeks, but she didn't seem to slow down. Her thin jacket moved with the wind, and he noticed again how little protection she had from the elements. Every so often, she would shift the strap of a small canvas bag slung over her shoulder. It didn't look heavy, but something about the way she adjusted it made him think it was her only bag, her lifeline for the day. About halfway through her journey, she paused briefly, leaning against a wooden fence near the edge of a small field. She rubbed her feet through her shoes and stretched her legs for just a moment before starting again. Officer Hayes could see the faint signs of exhaustion in the way she moved now, a slight limp, a heavier lift of her knees, but still, she didn't stop for long. He followed her past neighborhoods waking up for the day, past school buses picking up children, past coffee shops where people hurried inside for their morning lattes. Most of them didn't even glance at her, and the few who did just gave a polite nod before moving on. To them, she was just part of the background. But to Hayes, she was quickly becoming the center of the picture. The closer they got to the city, the busier the streets became. But even with the noise of traffic and the rush of people, she kept her same steady pace. She didn't seem distracted by the chaos around her, as if she had learned to block it all out. Every step was focused, purposeful. Finally, after more than 3 hours of walking, she stopped in front of a small corner diner. The windows glowed warmly, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted out each time someone opened the door. Without hesitation, she pushed it open and disappeared inside. Hayes parked across the street, sitting there for a moment as he tried to process what he just witnessed. 20 miles, on foot, every single day, all for this place. It was clear now that her story wasn't one of laziness or bad decisions, was one of sacrifice, of quiet endurance, and he knew he couldn't just drive away. He needed to talk to her, to understand everything. What he didn't realize was that this decision, the simple act of following her, was about to set off a chain of events that would change her life, and maybe even his, forever. From the outside, the diner looked warm and inviting, with soft lights glowing behind the glass and the sound of clinking dishes and low chatter spilling into the street. But before Sarah had reached that moment of comfort, she had faced miles of quiet struggle that most people would never imagine. Officer Hayes sat in his car for a while, watching through the window as Sarah tied on an apron and began clearing tables with practiced movements. To anyone inside, she probably looked like just another employee starting her shift, but he had seen what it took for her to get there, and it weighed heavily on him on the walk earlier. There had been moments that stayed in his mind, moments that spoke louder than words. He remembered the way she'd stopped briefly on the side of the road, shifting her weight off one foot as though it hurt. Her hands had been bare against the biting cold, fingers red and stiff every time a gust of wind swept down the road. Her thin jacket lifted slightly, and Hayes could see the frayed edges of her sweater underneath. It was the kind of clothing that had been worn and washed too many times. There had also been something in her posture, quiet resilience, yes, but also a kind of hidden weariness. It wasn't the lazy kind of tiredness people got from staying up too late. It was the deep, bone-heavy fatigue that came from doing something hard over and over, without rest, without relief. At one point, he had seen her pause near a gas station. Not to buy anything, he doubted she had the extra money, but just to stand in the warm air, drifting from the open door. She stayed for less than a minute before moving on, almost as if she didn't want to get too comfortable. Like stopping too long might make it harder to keep going. Even the way she crossed busy streets told a story. She didn't rush recklessly, but moved with purpose, as if every second counted. Every moment she wasn't walking was a moment she risked being late. And she couldn't afford that. Not when her job was her only steady lifeline, as he thought about it. Hayes realized how invisible her struggle had been to the world around her. Dozens of cars had passed her that morning, their drivers sipping coffee or fiddling with their radios. None of them knew that the woman walking along the road had already been on her feet for hours. None of them saw the tiny signs of exhaustion, the limp, the way she rolled her shoulders to ease the ache, the quick rub of her neck when she thought no one was looking. For Hayes, those details were impossible to ignore. He had seen plenty of people in difficult situations before, but there was something about Sarah's quiet determination that stuck with him. She didn't ask for help, didn't wave at passing cars, didn't look around for sympathy. She simply kept moving forward, as if the road itself had become a part of her life. And now, seeing her inside the diner, smiling politely at customers, he understood the truth. This was a woman carrying far more than just the weight of her own body. She was carrying responsibility, sacrifice, and the kind of love that pushed her through 20 miles of cold pavement every single day. Hayes knew then that he couldn't just leave it at that. Watching her struggle from a distance wasn't enough anymore. He needed to step in, to at least hear her story from her own lips. He didn't yet know how she would react, or if she'd even be willing to talk. But he was certain of one thing: whatever her reason, it deserved to be heard. Officer Hayes waited until the morning rush inside the diner began to slow. He didn't want to make a scene. He wanted this to be a quiet, respectful conversation. Still, there was a knot in his stomach. He didn't know how she would react. Would she be suspicious of him, embarrassed, maybe even angry that someone had been watching her? He stepped out of his patrol car and crossed the street. The bell above the diner door jingled as he pushed it open. The warmth hit him instantly, along with the smell of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon. For a moment, he almost forgot why he was there. It felt so far removed from the cold miles she had just walked. Sarah was behind the counter, wiping it down with a damp cloth. She looked up when he approached. Her polite smile, the same one she'd probably given hundreds of customers. But there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. Officers didn't usually show up for breakfast in the middle of their shift without a reason. "Good morning," Hayes began, his voice calm. "Do you have a minute to talk?" Her smile faltered slightly. She glanced toward the clock on the wall, probably thinking about the tables she still had to clear, the coffee she needed to refill. But something in his tone must have told her this wasn't about an order of pancakes. She set the cloth aside and nodded. They stepped a little away from the counter, toward a quiet corner booth. Hayes could feel the warmth of the coffee machines behind him and the low hum of conversations around them. It felt like they were in their own little bubble, separate from the rest of the world. "I've seen you walking," he said gently. "Every morning, same place, same time. You walk a long way, 20 miles, if I'm not mistaken. Why?" At first, she said nothing. Her eyes drifted toward the window, where the busy street outside was still damp from last night's rain. Then she gave a small shrug, as if trying to make it sound like no big deal. "I just don't have a car," she said, her voice quiet. "I need to get to work, so I walk." But Hayes could tell there was more. "You don't walk 20 miles every day unless life has given you no other choice." He leaned forward slightly, his tone softer now. "I don't mean to pry, but that's a lot for anyone. You must have a reason for putting yourself through it." Her eyes softened, and for the first time, the guarded expression on her face faded. She told him about Emily, her younger sister, about the small house they shared, about the bills that swallowed nearly every paycheck. She told him how the bus didn't run from where they lived. A car was out of the question, not just to buy, but to maintain. Hayes listened without interrupting. Every word confirmed what he had suspected. This wasn't about stubbornness. This was survival. Sacrifice and love woven together in one exhausting routine. When she finished, she gave a small laugh, but it wasn't from humor. It was the kind of laugh people give when they're trying not to sound like they're complaining. "It's not that bad," she said. "I just do what I have to do." Hayes felt a lump rise in his throat. He had heard a lot of stories in his years on the force, but something about hers struck him deep. It wasn't just the distance she walked. It was the quiet way she carried it, without asking for anything in return. He knew right then that walking away and forgetting about it wasn't an option anymore. He didn't yet know exactly what he was going to do, but he knew this: he couldn't let her keep walking those miles alone. Not if there was something he could do to help. Officer Hayes didn't go straight back to his patrol car after speaking with Sarah. Instead, he sat in the corner booth for a while, staring into the coffee the waitress had poured for him. Her story kept replaying in his mind. 20 miles. Twice a day, in every kind of weather, just to keep a roof over her and her sister's heads. He had seen people struggle before, but this was different. This was a quiet heroism that no one knew about, a kind of sacrifice that deserved more than just admiration. By the time he finished his coffee, Hayes had made up his mind. He wasn't going to just feel sorry for her. He was going to do something. That night, when his shift ended, he sat in his living room with his laptop and started typing. He wrote about Sarah not using her last name, not giving away private details, but painting a picture of the determination he had witnessed. He described the miles she walked, the way she never complained, the love she had for her sister, and the dignity she carried through it all. When he posted the story on social media, he didn't expect much. Maybe a few friends would see it. Maybe someone would offer an idea to help, but within hours, the post began to spread. People shared it, commented on it, tagged their friends. And then something remarkable happened. Strangers began to ask, "How can we help her?" The messages poured in. Some people offered money, Others offered to donate shoes and warm clothing. A few even said they could help her find a car. Hayes was stunned. He had always believed in the kindness of people, but seeing it come alive so quickly took his breath away. Within a week, the community had rallied like he'd never seen before. A local mechanic offered to inspect and repair a used car for free if one could be purchased. A woman who owned a small dealership called Hayes personally, saying she'd cover part of the cost. Neighbors he'd never met before showed up at the station with envelopes of cash, gift cards, and groceries. The night Hayes told Sarah about it, she didn't know how to react. At first, she shook her head, insisting she couldn't accept such generosity. "There are people out there who need it more than me," she said softly. But Hayes just smiled and told her, "Sarah, sometimes you have to let people be kind to you. You've walked enough. Miles let us carry you for a while." Tears welled in her eyes. She had spent so long pushing forward alone that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone on her side. And now, here were dozens, no, hundreds of people who wanted to help. Not because she had asked, but because they had been moved by her story. The day the car was delivered to her house, the street filled with neighbors, reporters, and smiling strangers holding signs that said things like, "You inspire us, and we believe in you." Emily stood beside her sister, holding her hand, eyes wide with joy. For the first time in a long time, Sarah didn't have to think about the miles ahead of her. She could think about the possibilities instead. That was the moment the road she had been walking alone became a road she shared with an entire community. It was the moment her quiet struggle turned into a story of hope, kindness, and proof that sometimes, even when you don't ask for it, the world finds a way to meet you halfway. The morning after Sarah received the car, the world felt different for the first time in over a year. She didn't have to lace up her worn-out shoes before the sun came up. She didn't have to brace herself for the biting wind, the endless pavement, or the ache in her legs that came from miles and miles of walking. Instead, she stood in her small driveway, her fingers lightly tracing the cool metal of the car door, almost as if she still couldn't believe it was real. Emily was already sitting in the passenger seat, grinning from ear to ear. "Come on, Sarah, we're going to be late." She teased. Sarah laughed, a sound that felt lighter than it had in years, and climbed in behind the wheel. The engine purred to life, and the warmth of the heater filled the car within minutes. Oh my gosh. It was such a simple comfort, but to Sarah, it felt like a luxury beyond measure as she drove down the familiar road she had walked so many times. She caught herself glancing at the sidewalks, remembering each turn, each crack in the pavement, each place she had stopped to catch her breath. She remembered rainy mornings when her clothes clung to her skin, icy days when her fingers had gone numb, and long summer afternoons when the sun felt like it was burning into her back. Those miles had shaped her, tested her, and strengthened her. She knew she would never forget them. Because those miles were more than a struggle, they were a testament to her willpower. A chapter of her life that proved she could survive the impossible. But now, a new chapter had begun. One where she didn't have to fight every single step just to get to work. One where she could come home earlier, spend more time with Emily, and maybe, just maybe, start dreaming for herself again. The community that had come together for her didn't disappear after the car was delivered. People still stopped by the diner to check in. Customers left little notes of encouragement on their receipts, and strangers sent letters telling her how her story had inspired them to keep going in their own lives. Sarah had never thought of herself as someone who could change the world, but now she realized that even quiet, unseen struggles could touch hearts far beyond what she could imagine. One crisp evening, as she locked up the diner after her shift, she looked at the parked car waiting for her and smiled. She knew that life would still have its challenges, but she also knew something she hadn't before: she wasn't alone anymore. There were people out there who cared, people who believed in her. And that knowledge was like a light that could never be put out as she drove home under the glow of the streetlights. Emily chattered beside her about school, about friends, about dreams for the future. Sarah listened, her heart full. She didn't need to say anything. She knew that this was exactly why she had walked all those miles. And now, with the road open before her, she felt ready for whatever lay ahead, because sometimes the hardest journeys lead to the most beautiful destinations, and for Sarah, this was just the beginning. Months passed since the day Sarah first drove to work, yet her story refused to fade into the background. It lived in the conversations of neighbors, in the posts shared across social media, and in the hearts of those who had read about her determination. What had started as a quiet act of survival had become a symbol, a reminder that even the smallest acts of resilience could ignite waves of kindness in unexpected places. Sarah began noticing changes she never anticipated. Strangers would walk into the diner, order a coffee, and then quietly slide an extra tip across the counter with a knowing smile. Sometimes they didn't even say anything, but their eyes told her they knew. Families stopped her on the street to tell her they had shared her story with their children, using it to teach lessons about perseverance, empathy, and hard work. Then, one morning, a letter arrived in the diner's mailbox, addressed to the woman who walked inside. Was a handwritten note from a young woman across the country. She had been on the verge of quitting college because she was working 2 jobs and felt like she couldn't keep up. After reading Sarah's story online, she decided to keep going. If you can walk 20 miles to work every day, I can finish what I started, the letter said. Sarah read it twice, her hands trembling. The ripple effect didn't stop there. A local school invited her to speak at a student assembly. At first, she hesitated. Public speaking had never been her thing, but she agreed, standing on the small stage with her heart pounding. She didn't give a speech filled with fancy words. She simply told them the truth, about the mornings when she wanted to give up, about the cold days when her legs felt like lead, and about the moments when the only thing that kept her moving was the thought of her sister's future. The gym was silent as she spoke, and when she finished, the students stood and clapped. Opportunities she never imagined began to unfold. A charity reached out, offering her a part-time position as a community outreach coordinator. They told her they needed someone who understood struggle firsthand, someone who could connect with people not from sympathy, but from shared experience. Sarah accepted, balancing the role alongside her diner shifts. Her life was still busy, but it was busy in a new way. The miles she had once walked alone now stretched out into countless connections, each one a thread tying her to people she had never met before. Her name had become more than just Sarah Mitchell. It had become a quiet symbol of endurance, a reminder that even the longest roads can lead to something good. One evening, as she stood in her kitchen preparing dinner, Emily hugged her from behind and said, "You know, you didn't just change your life, you've changed mine too, and probably a lot of other people's, even people you'll never meet." Sarah smiled, feeling the truth in her sister's words, because in the end, her journey hadn't ended with the car, or even with the kindness of the community. It had grown into something bigger, a ripple that traveled outward, touching lives she would never see, inspiring courage in people who might never know her face. And all of it had started with one woman, one road, and the choice to keep walking. It was a cool autumn morning when Sarah spotted her, a young woman walking along the same long stretch of road Sarah had once traveled every day. The girl's shoulders were hunched against the wind, and she carried a backpack that looked far too heavy for her small frame. Cars zipped past, not giving her a second glance. Sarah slowed her car, her eyes fixed on the figure in the rearview mirror. The image stirred something deep inside her, memories of early mornings filled with aching feet, numb hands, and the quiet determination that had pushed her forward. She remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to move through the world, hoping someone might notice, but never expecting they would. On impulse, she pulled over and waited. When the girl drew near, Sarah rolled down the window and offered a warm smile. "Morning, need a ride?" she asked. The young woman hesitated, her eyes cautious but curious. "Are you sure?" she replied softly. "I'm going a long way." Sarah's heart squeezed at the familiar words. "That's all right," she said. "I know what long walks feel like." As they drove, Sarah learned that her passenger's name was Mia. She was working 2 jobs while trying to save for college. Her bus pass had expired, and the route didn't run early enough for her morning shift anyway, so, like Sarah once had, she walked mile after mile because quitting was not an option. Listening to Mia, Sarah felt as if she were hearing an echo of her own past. Every detail of the girl's story reminded her of those days when she had trudged forward on nothing but willpower and love for her sister. The difference now was that Sarah had the power to do something about it. By the time they reached Mia's workplace, Sarah had made up her mind. She handed the girl her phone number and said, "Call me tomorrow morning. I'll pick you up." No one should have to walk that far if there's a way around it. In the weeks that followed, Sarah drove Mia to and from work whenever she could. But she didn't stop. There she spoke to the same community that had once rallied around her, telling them Mia's story, and, just like before, the kindness began to spread. A neighbor donated a bicycle. A local store provided winter clothing. And someone even started a small fundraiser for bus fare and college expenses. One crisp afternoon, Sarah watched Mia pedal away on the donated bike, her smile wide, her hair streaming behind her in the wind. It was a moment that hit Sarah like a wave of the road had come full circle once. She had been the one struggling along it, unseen and unheard. Now, she was the one making sure someone else didn't have to walk it alone. That night, sitting at her kitchen table with Emily beside her, Sarah thought about how far she had come. The miles she had walked hadn't just led her to the life she had now. They had prepared her for this, to be the person she wished she'd had in her own life back then. She realized something profound. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give is the same one you once desperately needed yourself. And in that moment, she understood that her story wasn't over. Not by a long shot, because kindness, like the road, has no real end, just keeps going, carrying each person a little further than they ever thought they could go.